You know, the artistic muse, it's this timeless, romantic idea, right? That one single person can just ignite a creative fire in someone else. But if you look behind the iconic paintings and the famous poems, you often find a story of incredible passion and, yeah, incredible tragedy. So what's really going on there? What's the psychological machinery that turns inspiration into something that can feel like an unbearable weight?
This poem, wow. It was written by the poet Paul Eluard for a woman named Gala, and you're going to want to remember that name. It just perfectly captures that all-consuming power some relationships have, a love that feels like it holds the entire world. But as we're about to see, that kind of intensity, it often comes with a pretty steep cost.
All right, so let's dig into this idea, the power of the muse, because it's not just about getting inspired. It's also about dealing with this immense, often life-altering pressure.
And this, right here, is the central tension we're going to unpack. The very same connection that fuels all that creativity can also become this source of profound hardship. The muse gives, for sure, but that same connection can also take away.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this strain we feel, we need a little help from cognitive science. There's a tool that helps us separate what happens to us from how we actually feel about it on the inside.
This is such a fundamental distinction. Think about it. The external pressures of the world, things like poverty or social rejection or getting sick, those are objective facts. But the stress we feel because of those facts, that's completely subjective. It can be wildly different from one person to the next. So let's put some official names on this. The framework we're using calls that objective external pressure imposed strain. And your internal subjective experience of it, that's the felt strain. See the difference? One is the world acting on you, the other is how you react to it.
So how do we get from one to the other? Well, it's through this simple but really powerful formula. The stress we feel is the external pressure multiplied by something called the strain transfer ratio, or STR. The easiest way to think about the STR is like a volume knob, and that knob is being tuned by our most important relationships. Some people turn the volume down for us, and others, well, they turn it way, way up.
And that brings us to the main event, really. This idea of lubricators versus catalysts. Our relationships basically act as one of two kinds of channels for strain. They either reduce the friction of life or they accelerate our reaction to it. This chart just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you've got lubricators. These are the connections that make our STR less than 1. They soothe us, they stabilize us, they give us options. Basically, they reduce our felt strain. But on the other side, you've got catalysts. They crank the STR up to be greater than 1, amplifying emotions, pushing us to react, and narrowing our choices until the felt strain feels even bigger than the actual pressure. Okay, theory is great, but let's see how this framework actually applies in the real world. We're going to step into our gallery of evidence and look at the lives of 3 famous artists and their muses, where these forces played out in some of the most dramatic ways you can imagine.
Our first story is one of incredible compassion and just overwhelming hardship. It's captured by Vincent van Gogh in his drawing Sorrow, which features his muse, a woman named Sienne Hornick.
The imposed strain here, on both of them, was just immense. Sienne was dealing with poverty, homelessness, addiction, everything. And Van Gogh, he had his own struggles, plus he was getting all this intense pressure from his family to end the relationship. He offered her a home, he saw her humanity, he didn't just see the misery. So here's the crucial point. Van Gogh was trying to be a lubricator. He really was. He was attempting to reduce the friction in Sienne's life, to lower her felt strain by giving her safety and compassion. But the imposed strain, the actual reality of their situation, was just too high. The lubrication just wasn't enough. And in the end, their connection was completely overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the world. All right, let's turn to our next canvas. This is a story of passionate, all-consuming love that became the absolute quintessential tragic bond, the painter Amedeo Modigliani and his muse, Jean Hébuterne. Talk about an intense love affair. Jean literally left everything behind to be with the charismatic but very self-destructive Modigliani. She became his entire world, the subject of his most famous paintings. But their identities were so fused together that when he died from tuberculosis, her own life just felt meaningless. 2 days later, pregnant with their second child, she ended her own life. This is, it's just a raw, stark example of a catalytic relationship. Their bond didn't reduce the strain of life, it amplified it. It focused everything into this singular, intense devotion. The external pressure of his illness and their poverty was transformed into a felt strain so incredibly powerful that life without him was literally unimaginable. Their strain transfer ratio was, well, it was clearly way, way greater than 1.
For our final case, we're shifting gears from the tragic to the truly surreal, with the totally unique and complex partnership of Salvador Dali and his wife, manager, and muse, Gala.
Gala was everything to Dali. She actually left her husband, the poet we heard from at the very beginning, to be with him. And she wasn't just his muse, she was like his anchor to reality. She handled his money, bought his paints, and fiercely promoted his career, turning this unknown artist into a global superstar. Their bond was absolute, even with all the complexities of their open relationship.
And what's so fascinating here is that a single person can be both. Gala was a master lubricator. She handled all the world's strain so that Dali didn't have to, keeping his STR low so he had the space to create. But at the same time, she was an incredibly powerful catalyst, aggressively amplifying his fame and his public persona, turning the volume on his identity all the way up. She literally managed the machine and was the muse.
So these are the ratios that define us. The forces of lubrication and catalysis, they're not just for famous artists. They are the invisible mechanics that shape all of our relationships, with people, with leaders, even with ideas.
So how can you actually spot these forces in your own life? Well, here's a simple little diagnostic. Just ask yourself 4 questions about any important connection you have. Does it speed your emotions up or slow them down? Does it expand your choices or narrow them? Is imitating them optional, or does it feel kind of enforced? And finally, can you detach without feeling fear or shame? If your answers lean one way, you're probably dealing with a lubricator. If they lean the other, it's a good bet it's a catalyst.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. These relationships, whether they're with people, or ideals, or leaders, they are constantly tuning the ratio between the world's pressure and our own stress. They can ground us, or they can ignite us. So the crucial question really is this: who or what is turning the knobs for you?